I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social Security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am, as always, Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, here to talk to you about classic television, usually using TV Guide magazines from our my personal collection to discuss our viewing choices from the past. This week we did not use the TV Guide, but my guest did not need one. She's an incredible author, producer, educator. Tananarive Due is such a good writer. If you've not read her stuff, The Reformatory or The Wishing Pool, The Keeper, she's got a new comic book out about werewolf comics. She also has a podcast called Life Writing. Just really smart and an interesting person. I first saw in the horror noir documentary about black horror, and just very insightful and fun to chat with. And I was happy that she, as you would imagine, is very busy. I was happy that she had a chance to sit down and talk to me about television. We talk about the show Emergency quite a bit. She also wrote an episode of the Jordan Peele Twilight Zone a couple years back, which is very good. It was certainly the most Twilight Zone-y feeling of that series, and that is a high compliment. But she's super fun, and I think you'll enjoy this. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Tananarive Due.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Tananarive Due, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well, you know.
Well, yeah. We just had a conversation about it. Was like, I feel like we need a new greeting that's like, how bad are you today?
How fare you in these tragic times?
Yes. How functional are you today? But
I showed up. That's all I can promise.
Half the battle, I think, like G.I. Joe. But that kind of does lead me to, one of the reasons that I was looking forward to speaking to you is, so much of your work and your insight is around sort of genre and, not only being a fiction writer, but realizing how that kind of fits in with the sort of allegory that like marginalized people are able to get a story and an idea across better with a genre piece than with a straight narrative.
True. I hadn't thought of it really that way, but yeah, actually. True.
See, because that always fascinates me where I'm like, Twilight Zone, which you wrote an episode of, a great episode, is probably, I think, maybe the most important show of the 20th century because I feel like, and to what we said earlier, the evidence of this isn't so great at the moment, but I feel like it made us better people, whether you meant it to or not, because aside from the super preachy episodes, you could kind of watch it and enjoy it on the surface or really get something pretty good out of it. Which is sort of unique to genre. So I thought perfect person to talk to about that sort of thing. But to start, like growing up in Florida, were you a TV kid or were you more drawn to like reading horror and sci-fi and that sort of stuff?
I mean, I loved reading. I wasn't reading a lot of horror as a young kid. I didn't read my first Stephen King novel till I was 16.
Oh, what was it?
It was The Shining.
Ah.
The silver paperback cover. And my mom gave it to me. So I did some reading. I mean, I remember reading like Wolfen or something, or maybe that was a novelization. Now that I think about it,
I will say the book much better than the film adaptation,
right? But Nancy Drew and Encyclopedia Brown. But I was totally a TV kid. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, some of the golden eras of sitcoms. Dramas, we're still rehashing Columbo, we're still rehashing, Matlock. So, but really my groove was Emergency. And I'm going to talk about that for the next 5 hours because I was totally obsessed with Emergency. Now, people who aren't familiar, which is most of you, and I know this for a fact because I can basically pinpoint whether people have even heard of Emergency based on how old they are. And I'm not going to go into my age. But I am at like an age like right at the tail end. Like it was in syndication. They had called it Emergency One for whatever reason. And then it got replaced by Chips. So it's like right at the end of the run of Emergency. Chips can go jump in a lake. It was no emergency.
Chips is a much sillier show.
And the thing now, okay, I don't know how much time people have, but
all the time in the world.
As I think about it, like, why did I care? Emergency was about a bunch of firefighters at Station 51. Now that I live in Southern California, I'm seeing the cross streets, like literally like the same cross streets I heard about as a kid. The fire engines and squads look just like on Emergency. So my inner child is very excited about that. But as a kid, that had nothing to do with my life. I wasn't interested in firefighters or firefighting, unlike a lot of people who said, oh yeah, that show inspired me to go be a paramedic, which by the way, it inspired tons of people to do that. For me, it was all about Randolph Mantooth, the star of Emergency. And he was, now again, I was at the tail end, so I was really too young to watch Emergency when it first came out. But I saw these, like at garage sales, I would get these old Tiger Beat magazines that would have him on the cover. He was like a poster boy. And that was it. And as I think back on it, he's half indigenous. His father was Seminole. And I really feel like I was drawn to that sort of muted marginalization I could see in him. They didn't really talk about it very much. And I had an opportunity to interview him in later years. Not that we really talked about this. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's a segue as if we discussed this. And then I'm thinking, no, that was in your head, darling. You never brought up.
This is a fictional conversation you had, but the subtext.
Yeah. But they, I know from obsessive reading of interviews with him during the time and before my time that he really did not want to be typecast as an indigenous actor, which is understandable. Because if you do that, what are the roles, right? Now, they did lean into it in a couple of episodes, one in particular where Chet, who was the prankster at the fire station, was really, microaggressing him pretty hard with the peace pipe and the feathers and all this kind of thing. So they were addressing it in kind of a jokey, like we knew he was being an a-hole, but it was also just part of the jokey camaraderie, and it did not end with him getting punched in the face, for example.
Yeah, which it probably should have.
In retrospect, he would have been well within his rights. So for me, I would like yawn through these long fires, like, oh my God, I'm in a fire. It's like 15 minutes, like, because this is, oh my God, don't tell me, Dragnet, Jack Webb.
Jack Webb, yeah.
Who was very well known, and I've listened to every episode of Dragnet, and I've listened to a lot of old radio, so I get what he was doing is he brought this verisimilitude to Dragnet. Like if people were having coffee, you're hearing the forks clink against the plates, especially the first season, they were really overdoing it.
Yeah.
And he brought
the Foley's
that same
out of control.
energy. He brought that same energy to Emergency. Like that hyper realism meant, yeah, you're going to be sitting here watching this fire for 10 minutes. Okay, we're going to show you.
It's like in real time. Yeah.
We're going to show you the unwrapping of the hose. We're going to spray, so that part, so boring to me. I could not just, go get a snack or whatever during these long fires. But sometimes during the long fires, something very exciting would happen. Johnny Gage, who was played by Randolph Mantooth, would get hurt. No, I lived for that. I lived for him. I suppose I should go into some kind of therapy, and maybe a therapist can explain to me why I loved it so much when Johnny got hurt. There was one episode, I remember it like yesterday. I came home from school just in time for Emergencies to come on at 3:00 in the afternoon in syndication. They had just shown up at a very sleepy run in the middle of the night. It turns out to be nothing. They're walking back to the squad, and some drunk driver races through the parking lot and runs over Johnny Gage. He flips over the hood. Oh my God. Exquisite.
It was unusual for a lead character to be vulnerable, to be injured. Like, if it didn't happen every week, it's kind of exciting. You're like, it's one of these episodes.
Right.
But also, it's the lead character. I mean, I can't think of to like Rockford Files, where you have a lead character who gets his ass kicked every other week.
No.
But before that, they're sort of infallible. Like Jack Webb on Dragnet's not getting, no one's getting a punch on him,
Not even a scratch. Not even a scratch.
It would make it seem sort of more realistic. And Emergency was not a children's show. But
children loved it.
They had, and they leaned into it. Like, I think the network was like, kids like it, let's make lunchboxes. And little boys loved that boring stuff because, kids were like, fire trucks and dump trucks. And they want to see all the hoses. And so it was like a weird phenomenon where this unintended audience loves this show and the network just goes with it.
It was great counter-programming to All in the Family, which I also did watch. With my parents. But yeah, it was, as a kid, usually you're not interested in that kind of like bigoted banter with, families, sitcom. Why is that even funny? I don't even know if I could go back and enjoy that show anymore. I'm afraid to try to watch it again. But Emergency was great counter-programming. Because, yes, not to be too gendered about it, but sure, the boys have got the fire and the lights and like, oh, that could be me when I grow up. For me, it was more like, what's Chet cooking for dinner? What's
got a real
banter? What's the banter happening at the station? What stupid thing is Johnny going to do this week that he gets teased for? Which nurse is going to turn him down this time that he's asked? Which was so funny to me. Here he is, a heartthrob in real life, like literally. Now, one thing he did say when I interviewed him was that he would stop traffic, right? Like, in a weird way, I have to say this as an aside. I interviewed him while I was a reporter for the Miami Herald, although it's unofficial. I was able to use that bona fides to sort of get past publicity. Nice. But believe me, no editor was waiting for that story. You got to get
this piece. This is an exclusive.
Emergency had been off the air for years, probably decades by then. And he was on a soap opera. I forget which, Loving it was called. He was, and I would follow him almost everywhere. I think I stopped at Loving, but I knew he was on the soap. I wanted to pitch it freelance to Soap Opera Magazine. So I got my interview. So excited when I heard that he pronounced my name correctly on the phone. I mean, my heart had basically stopped from there. And I remember him, I made the false assumption that he preferred doing television to theater. So I got a lecture about how much more important theater is to actors than television. So, okay, I say corrected. Sorry, dude, didn't mean to. But also I managed to sort of extract an apology without telling him that I was one of those fans who was writing him fan letters back in the day that he basically didn't answer. He was notorious for not dealing with fans. Right? So I got an apology, sort of, not personally again. I said, so from what I understand, when you were a younger actor,
were to have.
you didn't answer people's fan mail and stuff. And he's like, well, you have to understand, I'm a kid. I was this years old. I shouldn't even say this, but because I had his whole biography memorized, I knew that was not the age he was. But whatever.
Yep. You just agree. You just go, yes.
We'll let that go. I don't want to sound too obsessive, but I happen to know you were born 10 years before that. But okay, go on. No. He said, yeah, you have to understand, I'm this kid. It's my first time on a series. People are like, I'm stopping traffic on the street. It's really a mind trip. And I was like, okay, I forgive you. No.
You're absolved, my son.
That's not what I said. And then just in the past couple of years with this great site called Cameo, my husband got Randolph Mantooth to send me a personal video where I got to, and in the video, he had apparently said in his little, because you get a little paragraph to contextualize the video, Steve had said that I used to write emergency fan fiction. And the truth of it is, I taught myself a lot of my higher level writing skills by writing emergency fan fiction from junior high through high school and into college, honestly. Johnny Gage story, and in my Johnny Gage stories, he was always hurt. he was like abducted by a satanic cult, or
I'd watch that.
Or there was a really sadistic captain who hated him, who was like, And, you know, he said, what Randolph Mantooth said in a cameo video was, I don't know the relationship between emergency and horror, and I don't think I want to know. And I'm like, yeah, sir, you're right about that. You really don't want to know. But that was, again, another full circle. So rather than just sort of being a reporter, I got to just be myself, and he knew that it was an influence on me. And then on a more serious topic, I do think that it was the fledgling horror writer in me. I didn't know it. And none of my emergency stories were supernatural, not even close. The closest was probably the Satanic Cult. You could call that kind of folk horror, I guess, if I look back on it now. But I think it was writing his fear responses that was just intoxicating to me. I mean, he was always okay in the end. I never killed him or anything. But in every single story, he was terrified. Whether he was terrified of the fire, terrified of the cult, terrified of the captain. I mean, every single story I wrote. And then I morphed him into another character named Johnny Tiger, who is terrified of his powerful father. So, you know, it was always this poor guy.
There's so many threads there where, number one, like, first of all, have you ever seen the Satanic Cult episode of Starksy and Hutch?
Are you serious?
Oh, it's so
Are
good.
you serious?
It's a two-parter. It's
okay. I'm gonna look it up tonight.
There's two supernatural episodes of Starsky and Hutch, right?
Oh my God.
One of them, there's a real vampire played by John Saxon. In the Starsky and Hutch. And the guy who directed that episode, the only other things he directed were the Count Yorga vampire movies.
Is that crazy? Because I've been trying to get into Starsky and Hutch. Like, we've gone through Columbo twice in recent years, you know, starting with COVID, actually. And I don't want to go back to it too soon. So I'm trying to slide Starsky and Hutch in there.
Starsky surprised me in that how humorous it is on purpose. Like, there's definitely a lot of, like, the look of the 70s, but a lot of it is funny on purpose. Like, especially their banter is comedic intentionally. But the Satanic Cult episode is insane. And the John Saxon vampire, those two episodes alone are just like,
I kind of want to get off this interview right now and watch that. But thank you for that tip. That's amazing. Welcome. I feel a little bit like someone stole that from me. I don't know how.
They stole your fanfic from you.
They stole my fanfic. That was where I learned character conflict. I learned dialogue. I mean, I was basically on my way to becoming a professional level writer doing emergency fan fiction. That is not a lie.
Yeah, it's so many people that I talk to who go into writing, or like I'm a comedian by trade. But, you know, those of us that were really drawn, especially to television, because it was in our house every week and it was free, we did a lot of reverse engineering, either intentionally or not. And a lot of it, when we were very young, ended up being watching our parents react to things and trying to figure out where the connection was between this show and them laughing, what made that happen. And then also learning story structure of, you know, 3 acts and all that kind of stuff, just by the nature of being exposed to it, which is kind of amazing, the repetition that you're able to figure out. Whereas I feel like if I had sat down and intentionally tried to do that, it wouldn't have been as easy.
It's fun.
It's fun.
Because when the kind of geek I was, I'll tell you what kind of geek I was for TV. Because this was also the golden era of theme songs. Starting, like, Emergency had a great theme song. Sanford and Son had a slapping theme song. The Jeffersons.
Barney Miller.
Good Times. All of them. So I would, you know, my low-tech approach to preserving my favorite theme songs was to take a tape recorder and just record all my favorite theme songs when they came on. And I had a great recording of TV theme songs because I was just like, yes. I didn't know Quincy Jones had composed the theme song to Sanford and Son and all that, but I knew good theme songs when I heard them. And there were a bunch. Like, today's theme songs don't have anything. There's no comparison between today's theme songs and those in the 70s and early 80s.
But we barely have them now because a half-hour show now is 19 minutes. without commercials.
Oh my God.
So
That we've been together for a million years.
Sha-la-la-la.
And I bet we'll be together for a million more.
yeah, Cheers, like just or the
Cheers, all of them.
the so minor key Taxi theme, which is oddly like haunting.
Taxi.
And
I used
sad.
to play that on my keyboard. Yes.
It's amazing.
So many great theme songs.
And the other thing is like how much, to your point of, you're a girl growing up in Florida. Really, you're not going to get exposed to firefighting in Southern California anyway besides that. But the way we were able to be exposed to all these different walks of life and of people and experiences through the television of the 70s and 80s, there was sort of a shift to mostly aspirational stuff in the 90s that I think is kind of still happening now, even though I think it sort of morphed into like a weird comeuppance aspiration where you're either like, I want to be rich like that person, or like, I want to see that rich person fall into a pile of garbage, or like whatever reality TV is now. But, there was a struggle of people doing their job and sort of a blue collarness. And, the thing I always think of growing up here in Boston is like, good times. I would never know anything about a black family living in Cabrini Green. Like, how would I? But love the show. I'm watching that show. I'm watching Barney Miller, a show about cops in New York. Like,
True.
why would that appeal to a 9-year-old? But it did.
And in both cases, of course, they're exaggerated, and
Sure.
there's a lot you're not seeing, obviously. But to your point, absolutely yes, because Good Times was this weird combination of super, super broad comedy on the part of
Jimmy
what's his
Walker.
face who played J.J. Evans.
Yeah. Jimmy
oh my
J.J.
God, what is
Walker.
his name? J.J. Walker. Jimmy Walker, right. And then almost like a stage play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
A heavy
In terms
stage
of the
play sometimes.
These are Broadway level actors emoting survival and family and struggle, and I think that's the thing that was most disappointing about the new Good Times, which I never saw, but just looked so insulting from the preview I saw. Like, did they ever even see an episode of this show?
No, they were like, it's Jimmy J.J. Walker, but we're going to do it now. And that was another show, like John Amos left that show because he was like, this was sort of the show about the parents and our struggle, and you leaned into the comedy character, and a little goes a long way with that. And now it's like, well, what are we here for? Which is the downfall of so many shows.
In retrospect, it's amazing they got as much pathos in there as they did, and the level of the cast, all of that was pretty miraculous. And back to Emergency for a second, because I noticed we've drifted away.
Yes. Oh, I'm
from
sorry.
Emergency. Another thing that I think really appealed to me about that show was not just Randolph Mantooth and sort of vibing that there was something about him that was marginalized and different, but there was a Latino firefighter. There was a black doctor, Ron Pinkard, that was the name of the actor who played him at the hospital. And they did have an episode where one of the patients did not want to be treated by a black doctor. And when talk about feeling seen, you know what I mean? I was raised by civil rights activists. So for that to bleed into my favorite TV show just felt so unlikely and so refreshing, to be acknowledged. There was a black police detective who showed up a lot on the scenes and was always giving Johnny a hard time.
Your favorite.
Like there was a time Johnny and Roy got in trouble for supposedly running someone over with the squad, but it was a con artist who pretended he got hit, and they were in trouble the whole episode. I mean, it's fine that Roy was in trouble too, played by Kevin Tighe, but Johnny being in trouble, that was my happy place.
But you point out something very interesting to me in that, like, those plot lines, in a lot of ways, are more progressive than we get on TV now.
So sad to think of it that way, but you're right.
Which is, and Barney Miller, again, is one of the shows I always watch, but I mean, like, just the conversations they would have on that show about gay people and sex workers and all this stuff are so not cringy, and it shocks me. like they're being so frank and sort of human about these characters, and it's 40, 50 years ago, and I couldn't imagine this being on a sitcom now. That is sort of disheartening.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's kind of sad when you live long enough to feel like you see the clock turning back when you're so focused on things that you want to do to move even more forward,
Sure.
you know?
So obviously Twilight Zone and Outer Limits are huge ones for me. And again, when people ask me sort of, even though I don't revisit them as often as other shows, like I'll watch Newhart all day, every day, if you had me able to. But when people are like, what's your favorite show of all time? I'll usually blurt out Twilight Zone or Outer Limits or something, but because I feel like it's impact. You know, it's like, it's what shows haunted me when I can't get out of my head. And those are the ones that really do it, you know? And were there any other shows like that for you? Like, clearly you're learning sort of structure and peril and that sort of thing from Emergency. But was there anything where you were like, even the made-for-TV movies, I mean, the 70s were fantastic for made-for-TV horror movies. Oh my
God, the made-for-TV movies. Now, this is where you're absolutely right. You would never see this today. Roots.
Yeah.
1977. The whole country coming to a standstill to watch a miniseries about a black family and their intergenerational struggle with slavery. I mean, the numbers they were pulling in.
Biggest ever.
I can't even fathom. First of all, we don't have a structure for that anymore because we don't just have the 3 networks. I was even thinking, you know, I saw apparently the top Google searches right before and after the election were, is Joe Biden running for president? And I'm thinking, if we were still in the 3 network days, I don't think that would be a question.
No.
I think in the 3 network days, everybody would have known who was running for damn president.
Of course.
But it's so fractured now. You can literally just disappear into streamers. You can disappear into YouTube. And if you don't have political content, I guess, you can disappear into TikTok. And also, one that people don't talk about as much as Roots, although Roots was very, very impactful. You know, when I talk about learning how to write with fan fiction from Emergency, I also tried my hand at writing a little middle passage story, you know, with dialect when I saw Roots and when I read Roots. The other one that really, really hit me that people don't talk about is Holocaust.
Yes.
This was in response to Roots, I guess, because Roots was so... I get goosebumps just thinking about that miniseries. And I also read the novelization, and I had read The Diary of Anne Frank. So this is why the Holocaust felt very visceral to me, and the way slavery also felt very visceral, like a mother and daughter about to go into a shower, and the mother says, maybe it really is a shower. I'm still haunted by that.
Yeah.
And those were point of view characters. That was like a main character about to die in the shower.
And that's the power that I think isn't, well, to your point, I don't think you can use that power anymore because it doesn't exist.
Right.
But it's interesting when I see the swing from, I mean, Roots and Holocaust are very, what you see is what you get. There's no allegory there. It's unvarnished. But then, you know, less than 10 years later, we get V, which is very good and is about a fascist takeover. But the network was like, Ken Johnson has a famous story where he pitched it as a straight fascist takeover of America story. And the network said no. And then he just went, they're aliens. And they said, go for it. So it was like...
Well, trust me, that same conversation would happen today, except nobody would be pitching the fascist takeover of the United States because we're living that.
Yes.
But anyway, no one would pitch it.
And then you have something like America with Chris Christopherson, if you remember that miniseries, which was, in the 2016, that was the first thing I thought of, and I went back and rewatched it, which was probably a bad idea. But it's like shockingly smart and insightful. And, you know, this is on whatever it was. I think it was ABC, in 1987. And I'm like, you wouldn't get these things or The Day After, that sort of stuff where, The Day After, infamously, people say you could walk through the streets and just see everybody watching it in their houses. It wasn't, and there's no shared experience like that now.
Not anymore.
That would have those kind of impacts. Which, for better or worse, I mean, there's fewer gatekeepers, but also maybe I'm just old, but I'm like, maybe gatekeepers weren't so bad. They kind of filtered out a lot of, the great thing is everyone can make stuff now. The bad thing is everyone can make stuff now.
Right, that's true. That is true.
So they're sort of not vetted, but...
I'm thinking of also another miniseries called The Seekers, which of course starred Randolph Mantooth.
Why did you think of that?
I don't know. It just pops to mind, but and that was tragic. That whole story is so tragic, and I think it was his actual best work on television. And I told him that when I interviewed him. I really thought it was his best work on television. And he played a European, white American settler, and his brother Donald Mantooth.
Oh, I didn't know there was a Donald Mantooth.
Yes, he has a... Oh, honey, I know. Listen, I could give you a whole lecture just on the man's
The Don
life,
Swayze of the Mantooth clan.
But Donald Mantooth actually played an indigenous character, so you have two brothers, opposite sides. So that was interesting. And I totally get, the options would have been so few for... an actor like Randolph Mantooth, had he been fully indigenous, I think, had he not looked a little more ambiguous as he does, although I could tell. It was
enough. Yeah. Have you read Kliph Nesteroff's book, We Had a Little Real Estate Problem? Are you familiar with the book?
No.
So Kliph is really smart guy. He's written all these books about sort of history of comedy. His first book was about the U.S. comedy, basically the mob-owned U.S. comedy boom between vaudeville and television. But he wrote a book about native peoples and comedy. And it's fascinating. And I had no idea that Will Rogers was native.
Get out!
He was a Native
American,
full-blooded Native American.
No clue.
And and he wasn't, he didn't hide it either, but history sort of weirdly written it out. And it really just a lot of interesting stuff for these different characters in history who you would never know that now. For whatever reason, that's not part of the sort of cultural remembrance of their identity, even though it was a big part then. And actually his last book, is about sort of outrage culture, but meaning when people are like, you can't say that now, or stuff's too woke now. He basically went back and looked at writing about comedy back to the 1850s, and it's the same thing. People are like, you can't make jokes about Irish immigrants anymore. Comedy's dead. Stuff like that. And he's like, none of this is new, guys. It's very interesting to see how, and also disheartening how things don't change.
True.
But it's not surprising to me that people wouldn't know that, Mr. Mantooth was native when Will Rogers they didn't even know was.
How about that? See? I mean, the more you know.
It's completely
the more
nuts.
you know.
Then I think of the Night Stalker, which is sort of the ground zero for so many people I know who got into horror writing of learning Monster of the Week kind of structure.
I never watched it. I'm a bad girl. I never watched it.
I'll say this. If you didn't watch it growing up, I don't know if you'd love it. I think the original movie, yes, but the series, oof, there's some rough ones. There's one where Eric Estrada is an ancient god from Aztec god who's trying to sacrifice people. It's ridiculous, completely ridiculous.
Wow. Wow.
There's one about
I missed that.
Yeah, it was interesting to see, and it's sort of any port in a storm, we have horror on TV, we're going to watch it regardless of kind of what it is at that point.
For me, I think mine, even though it wasn't technically horror, was Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And I've tried to go back to them, and they just don't have the same impact that they had when I was younger. But everything from the opening theme, which again, great music.
Sure.
The silhouette of Alfred Hitchcock. I always thought of him as a horror guy, even though the series itself was not horror. But yeah, I loved it. I loved that. It would scare me.
Yeah, it was.
Human evil is very scary.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's you can't. This is another sort of theory I have. I'm curious what you think about this, where the sort of resurgence of millennials with vampire, sort of more supernatural, and you've written a werewolf comic recently, versus your slashers and that kind of stuff. strikes me as them loving rules, because nothing's more scary than chaos, right? But if there are rules, like a vampire can do this and you can kill them this way, or these magic words undo this thing, it's sort of a comforting thing.
You're absolutely right about that. And I think that does speak to one of the reasons why certain kinds of storytelling can be more effective through the prism of speculation, either fantasy or horror or science fiction, allegory, because you can impose those rules. And life itself is the chaos, right? Like I used to say right after the shooting at the church where 9 church members were killed in Charleston, you can't make sense of a young man walking into a church where he's treated with kindness and welcomed as family, then turning and shooting everyone. That doesn't make sense. I mean, it does if, on an intellectual level, if you know enough about history and sociology and psychology. But just on that human level, we're left sort of scratching our heads. How can there be such evil in the world? Whereas in a horror story, if I were writing that, obviously he's possessed.
Of course.
Obviously it was a demon who did that.
Right.
This was just a nice kid who wanted to go to church and some demon took over. And that imposition of not just rules, but reasoning.
Yes.
Like why? Like answering the question, like, why is this so? Is much more comforting than watching the news.
Right. Yeah, which is weird that those sorts of things are comforting. And like, as a person who, like, the Romero zombie movies are like my heart. Like especially during COVID, for better or worse, I was like, couldn't stop thinking about Dawn of the Dead and was just like, didn't you people listen? Like, we're screwing it up ourselves. And weirdly, the thing that haunted me the most from Dawn of the Dead was a thing that I used to think was stupid. And it's in the opening scene where they're at the newsroom and they're broadcasting, and the newscaster goes, despite everything, some people still have a sense of humor. And I was like, that's ridiculous. No one would ever. But then during COVID, I'm like, no, that's exactly what that guy would say, regardless.
It's so right. I remember once, this was pre-COVID, pre-Trump, someone tweeted that the end of the world could be happening. And someone would be on Twitter like, oh, all the lights are off, LOL.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what people were doing. This sort of gallows humor. And I'm not sure it's a bad thing. I think humor, and that's the other side of the coin for horror for me. When I'm super stressed, I watch a horror movie every day and I watch stand-up every day.
Yep.
And those are my go-tos. The first thing we did after COVID was to go see Dion Cole, live, when I was afraid to leave the house. But we had just had our vaccines, and I hoped for the best because
you needed it.
I needed to laugh. Yeah. And I think they do serve. In fact, we got to talk to Jordan Peele about this. My husband, Stephen Barnes, and I have courses online. This will be a minor plug, but it's Sunken Place Class. Yeah, sunkenplaceclass.com is our Black horror class, which is basically modeled after the one I teach for credit at UCLA, but it's a non-credit course that anybody can take. And then there's one called afrofuturismwebinar.com, which is about Black science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And back before Jordan Peele won his Oscar, it's kind of a little time capsule now. He Skyped in to talk to our online students, of which there were 6 at the time, I think. But it's a time capsule, so anyone who orders the class gets to see this pre-Oscar interview with Jordan Peele. And we talked about that relationship between horror and comedy because, of course, no one saw Jordan Peele coming with Get Out. If you were watching him on, not even Key and Peele, we started watching him on Mad TV. If you're watching him on Mad TV, you're watching on Key and Peele. In retrospect, you can see, oh yeah, they did do some science fiction. Yeah, they did do a couple horror things. But Get Out was out of nowhere for a lot of us. So we talked to him about that relationship, and his philosophy, which I think is really true, is that horror and comedy kind of work on the same basic premise, which is that you set up a false expectation and you subvert it. And depending on what the expectation is and how you subvert it, you get a laugh or you get a scream.
Same premise, different.
And that is just so true.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Anthony Jeselnik's whole shtick is you think he's going to say one thing and he says something else. And that's his whole shtick and you still can't guess what he's going to say, which is genius. He's a shock comedian, but I will say this. I've never heard him say anything
No,
racist.
he's one of the few that is actually using it as a benefit, not a lazy like shortcut. You know?
Yeah, I've heard him make jokes about racists, but I've never heard him make a racist joke. And it's always that subversion of expectations, and that's true with horror for sure. So yeah.
I if people are playing TV Guidance Counselor Bingo at home, they're going to get a square right now because I'm going to bring up Stephen King's Dance Macabre. But that's the book I recommend to everybody when they're trying to learn how to write comedy. And the reason is he lays it out so well, the structure, just different punchline. Is one's a horror and one's a comedy, and it's the clown at midnight section specifically because he says, you know, clown at the circus is funny, clown on your lawn at midnight is scary. I mean, if you if you take the clowns out of people being scared of clowns, but the inverse is true. Where I'm like, a monster on your lawn is scary, but if you put a monster in a circus, it's funny. Like, you know, there's So I'm like, and for whatever reason, people, it's so much easier to. Like that clicks with people as seeing the sort of structure piece and the shock humor thing. Because sometimes I'll see a shock comic and I'm like, you just threw the cat at me. You know, you got a reaction, but now you've at the expense of me trusting you, and I didn't enjoy it. You know,
right.
It's harder to do. Is there anything that you wrote a Twilight Zone episode for the Jordan Peele zone that was a couple years ago?
Very exciting. Yeah, that was my first credit. Last trip I took before COVID was out to the set in 2020.
Would you want to do more television?
Oh my God, yes. Are you kidding me? It's like, you've probably talked to a few people about this. It's so tough to break into this industry.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It's crazy.
Now especially.
Like every time you get your foot in the door, there's something pushing you back. Like we did the Twilight Zone and weren't able to like really follow up on that because that was just a freelance episode. And then, you know, Brian Fuller invited us to be in the Crystal Lake room. And then Brian and his second got fired, and Crystal and you know, the company, I'm not going to go too deeply into it.
But it never happened.
It shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
It should not have happened. But there you go again. So instead of getting that season 2 experience where we would have actually gotten the script and been on set to see, you know, you don't get that. So, you know, just this weekend, we heard that we might have funding to direct, Steve and I, to direct a short film adaptation of one of our longer works. It's a spec script that we shopped and got close even, you know, with Jordan Peele, you know, but Universal said no. I'm almost over that. Like the father said in Get Out, he almost got over it. That's going to be me. I'll be like, yeah, we almost sold this to Jordan Peele. I almost got over it, which means you never,
of course not,
ever get over it.
No. But it's interesting when you're used to being able to, I mean, you know, getting a book published isn't easy, but for the most part, in comparison, you have like 3 gates to cross, you know, whereas in TV, there's hundreds of people, and it's like the fact that anything good gets made is a miracle.
It's I hesitate to even criticize a bad movie because I'm like, this is a miracle. Yeah. Do you understand?
They got it done.
The fact that this exists, it's a total, we should be bowing before this movie.
Right. If anything good is in this, I'm impressed.
It's incredibly difficult to break into, and I've had people say, "Oh, you should direct," or "Oh, you should just create your own show."
Sure.
And I'm like, "Oh, thank you for that advice."
I didn't think of that.
Well, in both cases, I hadn't thought of it. I mean, I was very excited. Like, I would go home and journal. Hey, this person I admire, this studio executive said I should direct, but there was no check attached. No. That's the problem. There was no, it was like a sort of a piece of wisdom without a path. And those can be helpful, but when you're working in Hollywood, you really do have to think in terms of how long does it take to grow a tree, in terms of how long it takes for anything to get done. If you think it's going to be like, oh, next week I'm going to be working on my getting paid for my script, that's not going to. It's more like 6 months from now you might get paid if you manage to sell it. That's just getting past business affairs, you know.
And then it might not.
And never mind the gatekeepers, right? It's like. The whole industry is set to the slowest speed possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it's such a risk-averse industry that someone's hoping the whole thing's going to fall apart and they're not going to get blamed if it doesn't work. I mean, honestly, is what it feels like. It's like, oh, we said yes, but we have
the
to.
company went out of business before the thing I greenlit failed, so I'm off the hook.
Right, exactly. It's crazy. And it's like, and I was right. And I'm trying to put it all in my new novel. I'm working on a novel called Incident at Bear Creek Lodge, which is a creature story. It's that creature horror I've always wanted to see. But the under that story is a story about the legacy of actors and creators who tried to work in Hollywood in the bad old days, the 20s, the 30s, or last week, or whatever it is. And how frustrating it was. And the most fun I'm having is writing the contemporary sections where I'm using my experience with pitch meetings.
Yes. Oh, they are. Oof.
Because I have a scene where like a meeting went badly and one of the execs is chasing the director down to try to apologize and clean it up. And he says, tell me what it was. Was it what I said? And the exec just stares at him and doesn't say anything. He doesn't answer. And then he moves on to the next question. It's like, I've never worked in an industry where you're allowed to just not answer, where you're allowed to not explain, not speak, and everyone understands. Did you hear what I just said in that silence?
Yeah. It's like, the best pitch advice I ever got was from a guy who'd gotten a bunch of shows made, and he goes, never hand them anything written.
Oh, wow. That's what my manager said.
That's number one. And he goes, number two, when you describe a character, I don't care how well in your head, how well drawn out this character is, you need to tell them what actor it is, because they do not understand. You could describe this person like it was a real person in the best way possible, and the execs will be like, and if you're like, but he's Michael Keaton, they're like, I got it. Okay. All right.
Oh, yeah. Well, pick the right one. Pick the right one.
They need someone to envision, or they cannot do it. And I was like, oh, that's bad.
It's more than a notion. And everyone says it's going to get better in 2025. We'll see.
Yeah.
Because I would love, I started writing books because I love books. I have a book called The Reformatory that's gotten the best reviews of my career. It's gotten a bunch of awards. It was optioned for TV 2 years before it came out, but now I have it again to try to pitch it as a movie. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I really feel like I would have had more adaptations by now if I didn't write about black characters. Sure. I'm just going to say that. I just honestly believe that is true.
No, I agree.
I don't think anybody could argue that with me. So I'm not going to stop writing black characters, and that may be the price I have to pay, or it takes a little bit longer. But it is not lost on me that my only adaptations are the ones I've written myself, right? So my husband and I made a short film 10 years ago called Danger Word. It's dangerwordfilm.com if you want to check it out.
I'll put a link
It stars Frankie Faison. Like, we got a real actor in it. He's been in every Hannibal Lecter movie. And we also, Steve and I got a chance to write for Shudder. They did an anthology a lot of people didn't see. It came out a couple years ago now. It's called Horror Noir, like the documentary Horror Noir, but not a documentary.
It's sort of a follow-up of the documentary of like
It's a follow-up. Yeah. It's a little confusing. It wasn't my call to give them the same name. Everyone loves the documentary, and then when you talk about the anthology film, they're like, what?
Anthology film?
But it was 6 stories, several of them adaptations, which is where black horror really lags behind mainstream horror. The rule of thumb is adaptations are 50% of films. There's you write a good horror novel, there's a pretty good shot that you're going to get optioned or adapted, but it doesn't. The pipeline is a bit broken for black writers and black novels. So Steve and I got to adapt a short story of mine called The Lake, which is sort of about the monster within, and a story called Fugue State that co-starred Tony Todd, which is why I'm so heartbroken that we've lost Tony Todd, and now even heartbroken anew that they shot it during COVID, so we couldn't go on set.
So you never met him?
I did meet him at a photo shoot for Horror Noir, but to be on set, to see him work, and to learn, because we want to direct too, right? So that's one of the things that WGA was on strike about. You can't grow showrunners who aren't allowed to go on set.
Exactly.
It's an important part of the process. So if people keep getting stopped at these lower levels, and then there's all these rules about why you can't go to the set, how the hell are you supposed to learn how to be a showrunner? Which is, unfortunately, not consciously part of the idea, but it is part of the idea. Because it's a risk-averse industry. People only want to work with people they know, which translates to one demographic being vastly overrepresented and a bunch of other people trying to get in. Yeah.
Yeah. They want people who've already had success, and you can't get hired if you haven't already done it before.
No, we had a guy tell us, "Oh my God, we love your pitch so much better." To be honest, but we're going to go with this other guy because we've worked with him before.
Yeah, and to your point about black characters, like even Stephen King is one of my all-time favorites, and who has all the best intentions and characters, really can't write black characters, in my opinion. And God, does he try? But it ends up being
you got to give him the credit for like I love Stephen King. He blurbed my second book, My Soul to Keep, so I have nothing but kind things to say about him. There are not a lot of black people in Bangor, Maine.
No, there aren't. There aren't.
So the fact that he's trying to be inclusive, I get that. I get where that's coming from. I get the spirit of that, and I think that one thing I love about the horror community in general, even though it isn't translating so much on the film TV side as much yet, is that readers have really embraced horror from a lot of diverse authors. Like Stephen Graham Jones is an indigenous horror writer. He's one of the most popular horror writers in the country right now. And people have really embraced the Reformatory in a way that I've never been embraced by the whole horror community ever, and I've been publishing a long time. So that I find really encouraging, that the fans get it, and it's only a matter of time, I guess, before that bubbles up to the gatekeepers and there's more of a demand and less fear. That's what it is. It's fear. Oh my God, if this is about black people, no one will care. Yeah, which isn't true. No. It wasn't true of Get Out. It wasn't true of Black Panther.
It's provably not true.
Yeah.
But so maybe my crossover fan fiction of Good Times in the Candyman will sometimes get...
Hey, there you go. But it has to be the old the old Good Times.
Yes. Oh, not the new one. Yeah. Old Candyman,
can't do it
old
animated.
Good Times. No, it can't be animated.
Old Candyman, old Good Times. That's fine.
Animated horror doesn't work for me. In general. Is there anything you're watching?
It's not a big thing, right?
No. Although... in Japan, it is, weirdly.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm not a huge anime guy, but for whatever weird reason in Japan, animation isn't a genre. It's just a way of life. So there's
and it's infected our kids.
Yes,
it's the same for my son.
But they've done great Dracula adaptations. There's been just really good horror, sort of aliens influenced stuff. Is there anything that you're watching now that you really like, or any current shows?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I should have a ready answer for that. I feel like we're between shows. I have not caught up on season 3 of From. I'm kind of sad that there was such a big gap between season 2 and season 3 because I almost feel like I now need to go back and catch up on the last 3 episodes from season 2. Mm-hmm. But that won me over, and horror is very difficult to do on television for whatever reason. And I think they managed to do it. I like the show Evil. I think Evil manages... I also haven't caught up entirely on season 4. But again, they have figured out how to be scary using a lot of symbols of childhood and sort of inducing us into that once upon a time state. Just makes it super scary. What else? Oh my God, I feel like I'm leaving stuff out. I love... and I can never think of the name of the show. It's by... the guy who did Knives Out. It's the Columbo sort of reboot that they don't
Russian
call Columbo.
Doll? Is the Russian Doll? No, it's the one with her in it, though. With
Pokerface.
That's it, yeah.
Really, really good. Pokerface is really good. I wish there were 6 more episodes of that already. And new television. I know there's stuff I'm leaving out.
Elsbeth is decent. If you like, it's the Kings who do Evil and The Good Wife, Good Fight.
Oh, okay.
And it's Elsbeth, one of the characters from The Good Wife, and it's basically Columbo.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'll look into that.
It's lighter in tone than their other stuff, but it's good if you like that procedural stuff.
Well, we like it as sort of bedtime viewing.
Yeah, of course.
Like I'm all horror all day long, but that cutoff is 10:30. That I don't want to be feeding my brain right before sleep, especially now. Are you kidding me? That's the last thing I need.
We don't need that now.
So we go light procedural, we go comfort TV, we go comedy, Mystery Science Theater. We're doing that every night. Just trying to keep it light. Happy thoughts, happy thoughts, happy thoughts.
Are you a Mike or a Joel?
I am, you know what? They both have their qualities. Yep. Mike was the one who had the most longevity. So I've seen a lot more of those episodes. But the Joel ones, I'm always happy to see the old school Mystery Science Theater ones. And really what you should be asking is if I'm a Crow person, because I'm a Crow person.
Yes. Yeah.
That's who I am.
I've
Crow.
Weirdly had almost everyone from that show on this show except for Mike. Everyone else has been on. I don't know why.
Interesting.
Not by design. And when I think of my favorite episodes of that show, they're Mike episodes. But when I think about it, for some reason, I gravitate more to Joel. But I'm like, but if I look at it, I don't like those episodes as much. But whatever.
Those were the first, Those were the ones that out the bat. I'm liking Grotesquerie.
Oh, I don't know that.
That's on Hulu. It's Ryan Murphy's new show. Black lead for that, which is again rare. So I'm always trying to give that a shot. But honestly, I think my most consistent love for TV is retro TV. Like the Columbo, Dick Van Dyke Show. Oh my God, if I could just go through that one. It's just we have to pause because we go through the whole run. And I want to just start over again, but you can't. You got to wait a year or whatever. We've probably been through it 3 or 4 times since I've been married to Steve. I think it's the perfect sitcom. A lot of other shows, like the Larry Sanders Show, another one I love. We go through the whole run of that. Learned a lot from the Dick Van Dyke Show. And I love any TV shows that are about behind the scenes in the entertainment industry because it's such a crazy... So I love Hacks for the same reason. It's such a crazy industry that... I like to see it, I don't know. I just like to see the chaos in those shows. Mary Tyler Moore, we've gone through a couple times. I loved that as a kid. And I also, again, just sharp writing.
Yeah.
Sharp writing. Same with the Golden Girls. Very sharp writing.
Yeah, and that feels timeless as well, like Golden Girls especially. But yeah, we do the same. My wife and I also watch Mystery Science Theater most nights for bed. But the shows we've gone through are like, Newhart, Barney Miller, Car 54, Where Are You? Which is so underrated as being amazing.
We need to look at Newhart. You mentioned it a couple times, and I haven't really given that a chance.
Bob Newhart's show's great, but Newhart, the 80s show, is amazing, and it's weird, and it's just so good. The ensemble cast is so funny, and it just obviously has one of the best twist endings of anything ever, sitcom or otherwise. Like a long con payoff that's just... Can't think of anything that's done it better, but fantastic. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time and talk to me because I know you're busy and putting out
this
so much
was
stuff.
Fun. I didn't know what this was about at all.
You still said yes, but I'm glad that you did. There you go. Buy her books. You can go to tananarivedue.com, which has all of her links and all that stuff on there. I will put a link also in the show description. Super interesting person. Maybe want to go back and watch Emergency, which I had not really watched in the past. Hopefully you guys are doing okay. Hopefully if you're in the US, your Thanksgiving went okay. Yeah. Send me an email if you want, at ken@icanread.com or tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com. Also, there's been some issues with my I Can Read domain, so that should still be working, but if it's not, you can also email me at kenreadtvgc@gmail.com. I am no longer on Twitter. I have put that out of its misery. So it looks like Blue Sky's been the good replacement, so if you're not on Blue Sky, go over there. I'm Kenneth W. Reed on there, and Kenneth W. Reed on most other social media things. Or you can be a patron. $1 a month, $5 a month, you get PDFs. I try to share videos and that kind of stuff. If there's anything that you would like to see as a patron, either currently or that would entice you to become a patron, I would really appreciate it. And here we go, into the home stretch for 2024. So I'll be here next week. I hope you will too, for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
I kind of want to get off this interview right now and watch that. But thank you for that tip.